Okay, good afternoon. My name's Evan Weiner. I'm going to be in this 1994 talk. You're going to see me in this 1994 talk in action as a journalist. Those days I was doing radio. That was before I started really doing newspapers and magazines and doing some TV. And like I said, I was at some of these events in 1994, 31 years ago. It was also 31 years ago this week that you might have been glued to your TV watching OJ Simpson being chased by cops. Remember that?
Yeah, sure.
I was with Jerry Stiller, my cousin Jerry Stiller, that night. We're at a basketball game, and we're looking at the TV. I was a reporter. He got comped. Madison Square Garden, the Knicks are playing the Houston Rockets, the NBA championship finals. We're sitting in the rotunda, and he said, "What is this crap? What is this crap?" I said, "OJ Simpson apparently is being chased," and it becomes big, big news, and it's the beginning of when news becomes entertainment. Back in 1994, Al Primo got his way. Al Primo was a guy in the 60s who decided that news should be entertainment, which is why you got Eyewitness News in New York. But there were other things that took place. Now, you've heard a lot, including yesterday, about Canada. If they don't reach an agreement on trade with the United States within 30 days, well, they're going to put a counter tariff on the United States. And it all goes back to this, 1994, when the North American Free Trade Agreement takes place. Nelson Mandela becomes the South African president. There's peace. Now, there really wasn't peace, but there was a chance of peace in the Middle East as Israel and the Palestinian Liberation Organization signed the peace treaty. And Israel and Jordan, they too signed a peace treaty. So it looks like things are moving ahead in the Middle East. There's a genocide in the country of Rwanda, in Africa. The Whitewater scandal begins. Bill Clinton is accused of, and his wife Hillary, accused of some sort of hanky-panky in a failed real estate deal. Ukraine and NATO. We're still talking about Ukraine and NATO in 2025, 31 years later. Ukraine gives up its nukes. This is one left over from the civil rights era. In 1994, Dylan Beckwith is convicted of murdering Medgar Evers in 1963. There it is. Look at all those cops' cars chasing a white Bronco. Now, these things are run-of-the-mill in Los Angeles. This happens all the time. But in this car, a white Bronco happens to be OJ Simpson, and he is being chased 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 cops' cars are chasing OJ Simpson. But the year gets started in terms of what I call, and other people in my industry call, infotainment. You get a little information, but it becomes all entertainment. And it's Nancy Kerrigan. Remember Nancy Kerrigan, the figure skater who got clubbed in the leg prior to the Lillehammer Olympics in 1994? Well, she was assaulted. How many of you use Amazon? Hey, use Amazon. It starts in 1994. A little company starts in 1994. Now, I told you that I am involved in things, and that is me here. This is September 10th, 1994, and it's during the Major League Baseball owners and the Major League Baseball players' labor dispute. Players go on strike in August, and this is September, and this is Park Avenue, and this guy is John Harrington, who was one of the owners of the Boston Red Sox at the time, and he is one of the negotiators at that point, trying to solve the baseball strike and trying to save the World Series. Anybody take their kids or grandkids to see Lion King? That came out in 1994. As well as Forrest Gump. How many of you saw Forrest Gump? That comes out in 1994. Any New York Rangers fans here? Yeah, you're a Ranger fan. See, you remember 1994, the curse of Muldoon is over. The Rangers win the Stanley Cup. And I was at that game, and that is my credential for that night when the Rangers won, which was June 14th, 1994. The curse was over. Well, we start with the North America Free Trade Agreement. And I interviewed this guy, Brian Mulroney, who is the Prime Minister of Canada. In 2007, Your Textile was at work, sent me to give 2 talks at the George H.W. Bush Presidential Library in College Station, Texas. So you're still paying for me to speak to you. That particular one, there were only 20 people who were allowed at that talk, or those 2 talks in College Station, Texas. Anyway, North American Free Trade Agreement. Let's Mexico, the United States, and Canada get involved with free trade. And it is still talked about today, 31 years later. It is December 8th, 1993, and the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, was signed into law by President Bill Clinton. It goes into effect on January 1st. NAFTA was a trade pact between the United States, Canada, and Mexico, virtually eliminated all tariffs. I'm sure you've heard that word lately, tariffs, and trade restrictions between the 3 nations. The movement for free trade in North America had begun as a Republican initiative back in 1980 with Ronald Reagan. The idea stems from Reagan, and this is Santa Barbara, California. This is a Reagan museum because he had this ranch up there, and I'm standing underneath Reagan. By the way, in 1980, in January 1980, I interviewed Ronald Reagan up in Bear Mountain. There were about 6 people there. I was the only reporter there. I was working for WNEW Radio. Remember WNEW Radio? Make Believe Ballroom, William B. Williams, and all that. I was doing news for them. And I was the only reporter up there with Ronald Reagan, and he spoke to me for about a half hour. This is before he really caught fire in the 1980 Republican primary, and he would go on to win New Hampshire, and it would clear the decks for him, and George Bush basically had to catch him and never did. It was Ronald Reagan who began the push for the North America Free Trade Zone, made it part of that 1980 presidential campaign. After signing the Canada-United States Free Trade Agreement in 1988, the administrations of U.S. President George H.W. Bush and the Mexican President Carlos Salinas de Gortari and the Canadian Prime Minister Brian Mulroney negotiated what would become NAFTA. I interviewed Mulroney at the United Nations roughly about 1983, 1984. So there is, well actually 1988, 1989. There is Ottawa, Parliament Hill in Ottawa. The earlier United States Free Trade Agreement had been controversial and divisive in Canada, and featured as an issue in the 1988 Canadian election. In that election, more Canadians voted for anti-free trade parties like the Liberals, like the New Democrats, but the split of the voters between those 2 parties meant that the pro-trade progressive conservatives, or the PCs, came out of the election with the most seats and took power. Mulroney and the PCs had a parliamentary majority and easily passed the 1987 Canadian, U.S. FTA and the NAFTA bills eventually. Mulroney was replaced as a conservative leader and prime minister by Kim Campbell. By the way, she was the first female Canadian prime minister. There is a female president in Mexico now, and the United States has never had a female president. Campbell led the PC party into the 1993 elections, where they were decimated by the Liberal Party under John Chrétien, who campaigned on the promise to renegotiate or abrogate NAFTA. Chrétien subsequently negotiated 2 supplemental agreements with Bush, who worked to fast-track the signing prior to the end of his term, January 2nd, 1983. But Bush wouldn't run out of time. His term's gone. And he had to pass the required ratification and signing of the implementation law into the incoming president, Bill Clinton. Washington, D.C., Capitol's broken. Well, literally, the Capitol was broken. They were renovating the Capitol. Before sending it to the U.S. Senate, Clinton added two side agreements: the North American Agreement on Labor Cooperation and the North American Agreement on Environmental Cooperation to protect workers and the environment, and also to allay the concerns of many House members. The U.S. required its partners to adhere to environmental practices and regulations similar to their own. The United States House of Representatives passed NAFTA, the NAFTA Implementation Act, on November 17th. That would be 234 to 200, and the bill passed the Senate on November 20th. Clinton signed NAFTA, and he said, "NAFTA means jobs, American jobs, and good paying American jobs. If I didn't believe it, I wouldn't support this agreement." NAFTA replaced the previous Canada-U.S. Free Trade Agreement. Well, down in Mexico, there's Mexico. That was close to Mexico Independence Day, as a matter of fact, when I was down there. NAFTA was approved by the Mexican Senate on November 22nd, 1993, and was published in the official Gazette of the Federation on December 8th. The agreement brought the immediate elimination of, what's that word? Tariffs. Yeah, tariffs. You've heard that word, haven't you? Tariffs are really taxes on people. Corporations don't pay the tariffs. The people pay the tariffs because the tariffs are passed on to the people and they have to pay the costs. Anyway, so it brought the elimination of tariffs on more than one-half of Mexico's exports to the U.S. and more than one-third of the U.S. exports to Mexico. Within 10 years of the implementation, the U.S.-Mexico tariffs were to be eliminated except for some U.S. agricultural exports to Mexico, and that was to be phased out by within 15 years, which would have made it in 2009. Most U.S.-Canada trade was already duty-free. NAFTA also sought to eliminate non-tariff trade barriers and to protect the intellectual properties on traded products. Meanwhile, in South Africa, Nelson Mandela becomes the president of South Africa. And it was a long journey for Nelson Mandela. He won a landslide victory in South Africa's first election open to all citizens, which was the official end of the racist system of apartheid. The elections were held between April 26th and April 29th. After the early returns were announced on May 2nd, Mandela proclaimed that the black South Americans who had been disenfranchised for decades by the apartheid system of racial separation were now free at last. F.W. de Klerk eventually conceded defeat. Mandela spent 27 years in various South African prisons, and he's inaugurated as president on National Unity Government Day on May 10th. The National Party's F.W. de Klerk was his first deputy. Mandela led a broad coalition government known as the Government of National Unity. It was a remarkable story. He was released from prison in 1990, as you can see in this picture. He was released unconditionally on February 11, 1990, after spending 27 years in prison. This release happened after the apartheid government had previously offered him a conditional freedom in 1985. He said no. So he's released from prison in 1990, and it was a long, long haul. On June 12, 1964, Nelson Mandela received a life sentence for committing sabotage against South Africa's apartheid government, avoiding a possible death sentence. It wasn't the first time that Mandela was in trouble. In December 1956, he was arrested and accused of high treason against the state. Treason trial began in Pretoria in August 1958. In August, one charge was dropped. In October, the prosecution withdrew the indictment. 1961, he was arrested for treason, although acquitted. He was arrested again in 1962 for illegally leaving the country, convicted and sentenced to 5 years at the Robben Island prison. He was put on trial again in 1964 on charges of sabotage. He was convicted with several other members of the African National Council and sentenced to life in prison. 1989, F.W. de Klerk became South Africa's president and set about dismantling apartheid. He lifted the ban on the ANC, suspended executions, and in February ordered the release of Nelson Mandela. And there he is, coming out of prison in 1990. On February 11, 1990, he's 71 years old, and he walked out of South Africa's Victor Verster prison near Cape Town, 27 years in captivity, holding hands with his wife, Winnie. The world watched the occasion on television. Because of Mandela's decade-long confinement, few people knew what he even looked like. There were no recent photographs. He got involved in South African politics and ran for president. He would win. There he is, casting a ballot. He and de Klerk led efforts to renegotiate an end to apartheid, which resulted in the 1994 multiracial general election. 1993, Mandela and de Klerk were jointly awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. 22 million South Africans, regardless of race, were able to cast their ballots for the first time. The massive voter turnout, especially from previously disenfranchised black South Africans, was crucial to the African National Congress's victory. Well, you know what's going on in the Middle East right now? Gaza and Israel. Israel and Iran. There was some hopeful signs back in 1994 that bloodshed would be avoided. This is the White House, and that's Yitzhak Rabin, and that's the PLO leader, Yasser Arafat, and that is Bill Clinton. The Oslo Accord is signed, which meant that there could eventually be a two-state solution in the Middle East with Israel and Palestinians, and other peace treaties could follow after that. September 13, 1993, Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin and the Palestinian Liberation Organization negotiator Mahmoud Abbas signed the Declaration of Principles on Interim Self-Government Arrangements, commonly referred to as the Oslo Accords at the White House. Before I go on, I know a guy down in Baltimore by the name of Robert Friedman, probably was CIA at one point. He joined the United States Air Force in 1965. He's written books about Israel and the Arabs going back to the Balfour Declaration in 1917, where the Brits basically said, yeah, there should be a state of a Jewish state. And Warren G. Harding was president between 1921 and 1923. Also said basically the same thing in 1922. Friedman was an advisor to various prime ministers of Israel. He also conferred with Arafat in Tunis, also other people like Abbas. And he said that he thought, in his opinion, it was the British who screwed up the Middle East and started all the problems between the Arabs and the Jews, because they lived pretty much okay together until about 1910, 1911, and the Balfour Doctrine came out, and the Arabs were very upset with it. The Zionists were reasonably happy with it, but the British were controlling the territory. Israel accepted the PLO as the representative of the Palestinians, and the PLO renounced terrorism and recognized Israel's right to exist in peace. Both sides agreed that a Palestinian Authority would be established and assume the governing responsibilities in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip over a 5-year period, which would last, Gaza would become a country under the right circumstances by 1999. U.S. officials were briefed on secret negotiations that the Israelis and Palestinians had begun in Oslo, Norway in December 1992, but the Bush administration didn't get involved with it, nor did Clinton, who starts his presidency in January 1993. And again, here are some of the people: Mubarak from Egypt, Rabin, Yasser Arafat there, the Oslo Accords. On May 4th, an agreement was reached in Cairo, and it arranged for the first stage of the withdrawal of Israeli security forces and the transfer of authority to the newly created Palestinian Authority. Within weeks of the withdrawal, the cities of Gaza and Jericho were completed. Israelis are gone. And the Palestinian authorities began carrying out civilian functions in those areas. The United States did not play a critical part in the negotiations leading up to the Cairo agreements. The Israeli Prime Minister were being discovered that the PLO's Yasser Arafat failed to sign a map of Jericho in the agreement. Arafat defiantly refused to sign despite the urgings of the Israeli Foreign Minister Shimon Peres, the Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak, and the United States Secretary of State Warren Christopher. Eventually, Arafat would sign. And here's the agreement being signed, and Clinton beaming over what is going on. This is the Israel-Jordan Peace Treaty. The Israel-Jordan Peace Treaty, signed on October 26th at the Arava Desert border crossing of the Dead Sea. Treaty formally ended 46 years of hostility between Israel and Jordan. The agreement was witnessed by the United States President Bill Clinton. The treaty established full diplomatic relations and resolved long-standing land and water disputes. It also opened the way for cooperation in trade and environmental protection. Egypt welcomed the agreement, while Syria ignored it. The Lebanese militia group Hezbollah resisted the treaty, and 20 minutes prior to the ceremony launched mortar and rocket attacks against the northern Galilee towns. Israeli residents there were forced to evacuate the towns for the safety of shelters. Several border crossings were erected, allowing tourists, businessmen, and workers to travel. Israeli tourists started to visit Jordan, and many would see the red rock of Petra. Well, in Rwanda, there's a genocide. The Rwandan genocide took place between April 7th and July 19th during the Rwanda Civil War. Over a span of about 100 days, members of the Tutsi ethnic group, as well as some moderate Hutu and Twa, were systematically killed by the Hutu militias. While the Rwandan constitution states that over 1 million people were killed, most scholarly estimates suggest somewhere between 500,000 and 662,000 Tutsis died, mostly men. The genocide was marked by extreme violence, with victims often murdered by their neighbors, and widespread sexual violence. Between 250,000 and 500,000 women were raped. And unfortunately, these are the pictures of the victims. The genocide was rooted in a long-standing ethnic tension, exacerbated by the Rwandan Civil War, which began in 1990, when the Rwandan Patriotic Front, predominantly Tutsi rebel group, invaded Rwanda from Uganda. The war reached a tentative peace with the Arusha Accords in 1993. The assassination of Giovanna Habyarimana on April the 6th ignited the genocide as Hutu extremists used the power vacuum to target Tutsis and moderate Hutu leaders. The international community sat on their hands. Nobody got involved. By July 4th, the RFP military took control of the entire territory of Rwanda. The genocide left Rwanda devastated, its infrastructure destroyed, millions displaced. Survivors faced significant physical and psychological trauma. Well, Bill Clinton is fighting off Jennifer Flowers and Paula Jones, who both claim that they had affairs with him. In fact, my wife met Jennifer Flowers in 2003 in New Orleans, and she's doing a little nightclub, actually. She owned the nightclub. She's doing Betty Boop songs. That's what she's doing. But in this one, here you see George Stephanopoulos and Bill Clinton, deep water, the Whitewater scandal. Well, what exactly was the Whitewater scandal? Well, it ended up going into Bill Clinton getting pleased by Monica Lewinsky, in the Oval Office and then saying in a deposition, I did not have sex with that woman. How it got from there to there, I don't know. But it did. This was really a game in Washington being played. Well, Americans are trying to do their day-to-day business, and they're playing this game, these politicians. And nobody in the media, of course, got up there and saying, why are you playing this game? Infrastructure, what about that? What about this? What about that? No, we got to listen to Ken Starr, and I'm going to tell you about Ken Starr in a few minutes. The investigations began in 1994 as an inquiry by an independent U.S. counsel under the propriety of real estate transactions involving Clinton and his wife, Hillary Rodham Clinton, in 1978, when he was the Attorney General of Arkansas. Whitewater resurfaced when Clinton ran for president. You got Paula Jones, you got Jennifer Flowers, and you got the 60 Minutes, all that stuff going in 1992. New York Times on March 8th published a lengthy account of the Whitewater investment as told by James McDougal, who complained that he'd borne an unfair share of the investment and the loss. And there is Hillary Clinton while she was a member of the Rose Law Firm in Little Rock, Arkansas. Critics soon raised questions about Hillary Clinton's representation of McDougal's savings and loan company while she was an attorney at the Rose Law Firm in Little Rock, whether state regulators under Bill Clinton extended favors to the savings and loans in exchange for campaign funds, and whether Clinton properly paid taxes on the Whitewater business, and whether McDougal might have illegally channeled money from the savings and loans into the Whitewater project. The Whitewater controversy quickly escalated on July 20th, 1993, 6 months into Clinton's presidency, when Vincent W. Foster Jr., close friend of Clinton's from Little Rock, and a deputy White House counsel, was found dead of a gunshot wound to his head in Fort Marcy Park, a Civil War park maintained by the National Park Service just outside, across the Potomac of Washington, D.C. His death was a suicide. Now, the change in the media is coming. It's coming. It comes with Nancy Kerrigan. It comes with OJ Simpson. It starts with a guy named Al Primo, who thought that news should have some entertainment and that television shouldn't be giving that time away. They should be selling that time, making money off the news. And then, of course, you had in the 80s the proliferation of talk radio after the Fairness Doctrine was gotten rid of in 1987, where you had people just lie, straight out lie. No checks on them, which is what most talk radio is all about. And I can say that as somebody who worked in the radio industry. One of the tricks of the trade was Premier Networks in Los Angeles used to hire voice actors to call up these shows, to keep the shows going. And you could call a show once every 60 days and get paid like $500. So you could see the media is going into this trash environment. And Vince Foster is one of the first victims of the trash environment. Foster handled Whitewater issues for the Clintons since the campaign and became the focus of criticism in the media, mainly the Wall Street Journal. In his White House office, he left a bitter note about not having to be met for the spotlight in Washington, D.C., where ruining people is considered a sport. Conservative groups proclaim dark theories, conspiracy theories, all kinds of conspiracy theories about how the Clintons had Foster murdered because he might reveal Whitewater secrets. The Foster death became a staple on talk radio with unsubstantiated theories spread by the likes of Rush Limbaugh and other fellow peddlers. On the same day that Foster killed himself, Polar Casey, the new U.S. attorney at Little Rock, appointed by Clinton, obtained a federal search warrant for the Little Rock offices of David Hale, a municipal judge who ran a small business lending company called Capital Management Services, which was subsidized by the Federal Small Business Administration. Here is Hale. The next day, FBI agents raided the offices, and on September 23rd, a grand jury indicted Hale. He advanced $2.04 million to 13 dummy corporations that he controlled. Hale's business also had extensive transactions in the 1980s with the McDougalls, Susan McDougal, McDougal's wife, Jim Guy Tucker, a governor of Arkansas, and several prominent Republican officials. In January, Clinton capitulated to the Republican clamor over Whitewater and what's going on talk radio, the nonsense on talk radio, and told the Attorney General, Janet Reno, to appoint a special counsel to investigate. Reno appointed Robert B. Fisk Jr., a Republican and a former U.S. attorney in New York, who I happen to know. I'll tell you about that in a minute. Is given broad authority to investigate Whitewater and any related activity. Now, I got to know Bob Fisk in June of 1986. He was the National Football League's co-counsel in the antitrust lawsuit brought about by the United States Football League and Donald Trump against the National Football League. Fisk was the only decent lawyer there. I mean, he had Harvey Myerson, who was Trump's attorney, ended up in jail, and Dan Cooper, Trump's attorney, he also ended up in jail. And Fisk went on and did work in Washington, D.C. The only guy who I had any respect for in that courtroom, I didn't have any respect for the judge either, Peter K. Leisure. But Fisk was he was a straight shooter. He was a good guy, in my opinion. And like I said, in this talk, I happen to deal with these people over the years. When David Hale complained that the U.S. attorney in Arkansas would not plea bargain with him in exchange for information about high officials, including Clinton, his case was transferred from the U.S. attorney for the Eastern District of Arkansas to the independent counsel. And it's time to say goodbye to my old acquaintance, Bob Fisk. You're out of here, Bob. You're gone. You're too much of a straight shooter, and you don't play the political games. You're gone. And that's why I found out about Bob Fisk. And, I held him in high regard as a reporter. Fisk conducted investigations, released an interim report June 30th that, in a summary, concluded that Bill Clinton and the White House officials had not interfered when the Resolution Trust Corporation, which was investigating the failed Madison Guaranty Savings and Loan, a partner of the Whitewater Development Corporation. So Clinton had nothing to do with it. Also, Bob Fisk's report concluded that Vince Foster died of suicide. Bob Fisk was no longer the darling of conservative radio. The Republicans listened and said, get rid of him, even though Fisk is one of the most decent lawyers in that stratosphere I ever met and dealt with. In the summer, after Fisk concluded that Foster committed suicide, conservative groups and the noise on talk radio and Republican senators claimed that his investigation was not diligent enough. He was a thorough guy, Bob Fisk. A 3-judge U.S. Court of Appeals replaced Fisk with Kenneth W. Starr, a former federal appeals court judge and a harsh critic of Clinton. Starr would take the investigation beyond Whitewater into sex in the Oval Office. Meanwhile, Ukraine. 31 years later, Ukraine's still in the news. There is Boris Yeltsin and Bill Clinton. On January 10th, Ukraine announces that it will give up the world's 3rd biggest nuclear arsenal. Following the collapse of the Soviet Union, Ukraine received over 1,800 warheads and 175 long-range missiles. After 2 years of talks between Ukraine, Russia, and the United States, the country agreed to get rid of all nuclear weapons if Russia would respect its sovereignty. On December 5th, the Budapest Memorandum ensured the destruction of dangerous post-Soviet nuclear stockpile was overshadowed overshadowed at the time by the Russian President Boris Yeltsin's complaint that NATO expansion was causing a new division of Europe. Didn't like Russia for some reason. Hey, they're still talking about that 31 years later. The blow-up occurred simultaneously with one of the most significant achievements of the U.S.-Russian Ukrainian cooperation threat reduction, the signing of the Budapest Memorandum with Ukraine on disposing of the deteriorating Soviet arsenal of nuclear weapons based in Ukraine. There's a movie about this. There is a movie out there about this. Medgar Evers' assassin is convicted 31 years later in 1994. Medgar Evers and his wife Burley established the NAACP office in Jackson, Mississippi in the mid-1950s. He led marches, prayer vigils, voter registration drives, and boycotts. As early as 1955, Evers' name appeared on the death list. Yet he was persistent. He appealed to blacks and whites, work together. Let's have a peaceful solution of the social problems. He orchestrated the boycott of white merchants in Jackson in the early 1960s. On February 5th, 1994, the white supremacist Byron De La Beckwith is convicted in the murder of American civil rights leader Medgar Evers over 30 years after the crime occurred. Now, let me tell you what happened in the South right after his murder and subsequent things. FBI would lose evidence or couldn't find the evidence. People knew what was going on. I knew a guy who was with the United Press from 1958 to 1962, and he was covering the civil rights movement in the South. And he told me, he said, everybody knew what was going on there. Everybody knew who was causing all the crimes and everything else. Everybody knew except the FBI. It was the cops who were in on all this stuff, he told me. He had to, Fred, the guy's name was Fred, he had to be taken out of the South by UP because there were threats on his life because of the reporting that he was doing. Evers had been threatened with death for many years before he was killed in 1963. May 28, 1963, a Molotov cocktail was thrown into the garage of his home. 5 days before his death, he was nearly run down by a car after he emerged from the Jackson, Mississippi NAACP offices. In Jackson, on June 12, 1963, Evers pulled into his driveway after returning from an integration meeting where he had conferred with the NAACP lawyers. Emerging from his car carrying NAACP t-shirts that stated, "Jim Crow must go," Evers was struck in the back with a bullet that ricocheted into his home. Staggered 30 feet before collapsing, died at a hospital 50 minutes later. He was 37 years old. And he was killed by this guy, De La Beckwith. He was a fertilizer salesman and Ku Klux Klan member, widely believed to be the killer. Everybody, according to Fred, everybody knew what was going on down there. And he was prosecuted for the murder in 1964. However, 2 all-white and all-male jurors were deadlocked, and refused to convict him. Second trial was held the same year. That was a hung jury. The matter was dropped when it appeared that a conviction would be impossible. That is Merle Evers here, his wife. She became the first woman to chair the NAACP, and she refused to give up to get Beckwith, pressing authorities to reopen the case. 1989, documents came to light. 1989, 26 years later, showing that jurors in the case were illegally screened. Par for the course then. Prosecutor Bobby DeLaughter worked with Merle Evers to force another prosecution of De La Beckwith. After 4 years of legal maneuvering, they were finally successful. At the third trial, they produced a rifle scope from the murder weapon with De La Beckwith's fingerprints, as well as new witnesses who testified that De La Beckwith had bragged about committing the crime. He was convicted, given a life sentence by a racially diverse jury. He was 73 years old, sentenced to life in prison. The White Bronco chase. The White Bronco chase. There it was. And Al Primo's vision of infotainment comes to be with the White Bronco chase. People watched it. Millions of people watched it. People were laughing at it. OJ! It's OJ Simpson! What a nice guy! I interviewed OJ Simpson a few times and came across as a nice guy during an interview. But I have some tape at home of an interview I once did with him where he said, you know, I lied about things to Marcus Allen. I exaggerated them. Marcus Allen was a football player at USC. He said he did the things that we lied about. He and his friend Al Cowlings and others. So I got OJ on tape talking about how he exaggerated things. It is June 17th, and I'm at Madison Square Garden, and I'm watching the New York Knicks play the Houston Rockets in the NBA Championship Final, and I'm in the rotunda with my cousin Jerry Stiller. You remember Jerry Stiller from Stiller and Mirror? So I'm there, and I'm watching the game with him, and he says, what is this? What's going on? I said, something about O.J. Simpson being chased by cops. So it is, and he couldn't believe it. And then Madonna walked by. He said, who's that skanky-looking woman? I said, that's Madonna. That's Madonna? She looks like she's begging for money on the streets. I said, yeah, that's Madonna. Anyway, O.J. Simpson, the white Bronco, the Ford Bronco, captured the world's attention, or at least television producers who had their minds on infotainment. The white Bronco was driven by Simpson's boyhood friend from San Francisco and former NFL colleague Al A.C. Cowlings. The ex-football star led police on a 2-hour slow chase across Southern California after Simpson was charged in the deaths of his ex-wife Nicole Brown Simpson and her friend Ronald Goldman on June 10th. Simpson's ex-wife and Goldman were stabbed to death outside her condominium in Los Angeles. Simpson became the prime suspect. At 8:30 in the morning on June 17th, Robert Shapiro, remember the media gave them a nickname, the lawyers, the Dream Team, the Dream Team. Oh, it's so perfect for TV, for news. It becomes entertainment. He was one of Simpson's lawyers. He receives a call from the Los Angeles Police Department telling him, surrender your client. 9:30, Shapiro goes to an undisclosed home in the San Fernando Valley and informs Simpson that he will have to surrender by 11 o'clock. Murder charges are filed against Simpson and the killings of his ex-wife and her friend. Arraignment is scheduled for the afternoon. 11 o'clock? Oh, there's no OJ. No OJ. Shortly after noon, Shapiro receives a call from the LAPD telling him that police must announce that Simpson is a fugitive. Shapiro gives police direction to the San Fernando Valley home. Police arrive at the house. Shapiro, who is with Simpson's doctors and others in the room at the house, said Simpson and Cowlings had left the building. There they are. There they are. And not only that, you got all these people lined up along the highway. They're watching this spectacle. They're watching this spectacle. OJ and the white Bronco chase. The juice is on the loose. 1:50 p.m. LAPD Commander David Gascon announces that Simpson has not surrendered for the arraignment as scheduled, and he is a fugitive. At 3 o'clock, which is 6 o'clock New York time, an LAPD officer at the condominium tells reporters, O.J. Simpson's not here. The district attorney, Gil Garcetti, says at a news conference that anyone helping Simpson flee will be prosecuted as a felon. We will find Mr. Simpson and bring him to justice. Police are searching for Cowlings. Garcetti says prosecutors have not yet decided whether to seek the death penalty in the murder case against the guy who ran through airports because he had to get a Hertz car. O.J. Simpson, the juice. At 4:45 p.m., 7:45 New York time, police issue an arrest warrant for Cowlings. It is 5 p.m. Los Angeles time. Simpson holds a news conference during which longtime friend Robert Kardashian, if Kardashian sounds familiar, he is the father of all the Kardashian kids, and he was married to, I can't even remember her name now, the Kardashian wife that became famous on television eventually. So Kardashian reads a letter from Simpson. Don't feel sorry for me. I've had a great life, great friends. Please think of the real OJ. Real OJ once told me that he lies. He did tell me. I have that tape. Peace and love, OJ. 5:51 p.m. Simpson reportedly makes a 911 call from a cell phone in Cowling's Ford Bronco. His location is traced to the 5 freeway. Anybody been on the 5 freeway?
Where does it go?
I went from Santa Monica on Saturday on the 5. I went from Santa Monica to Wilshire Boulevard. 7 miles. Took me 2.5 hours between 2 o'clock and 4:30 in the afternoon on the Saturday, going up 5 in Los Angeles. It's every day that is a slow chase on 5. Anyway, so he's on the 5 freeway in Orange County. So he's gotten down by Anaheim near Lake Forrest where his ex-wife was buried. 5:56, the California Highway Patrol begins pursuit after being told that Simpson had a gun to his own head. Law enforcement officers followed the vehicle at low speeds for more than an hour. And I'm sitting there with Jerry Stiller saying, why? Why is this news? Why? Well, the juice is on the loose. He's finally arrested. There he is. There's the juice. O.J. Simpson, the White Bronco chase, which is now famous in television news. 7:30 p.m., 10:30 at night New York time, after moving on to the 91 highway, the Bronco turns north on the 405 freeway in Torrance, soon encountering crowds standing on the roadway and overpasses. Some onlookers hold handmade banners and signs while others scream, "That juice is on the loose!" It becomes entertainment. That's what it is. 7:57 p.m., Simpson and Cowlings arrive at Simpson's Brentwood home and negotiations for surrender begin. At 8:47, police issue an all clear after taking Simpson into custody. What a relief. What a relief. So 95 million people watched that chase. 95 million Americans watched that chase. NBC had the basketball game on between the Knicks and Rockets. 3/4 of the picture was the O.J. Simpson chase. In the little spot on the right side was the basketball game. Simpson was formally arraigned on July 22nd, entering a plea of not guilty. It would be the start of the O.J. Simpson trial of the century with the Dream Team and Marcia Clark and all these other people. It would also be the real start of when you lost news, when news became part information, part entertainment. Al Primo's goal of 30 years earlier to create that had finally come to be. Lots of entertainment, a piece of information on television sets and talk radio. But the year got underway with Nancy Kerrigan being clubbed by Tanya Bigley, my former agent, Tanya Harding's boyfriend. It is January the 6th. Nancy Kerrigan, an American figure skater, was struck on the lower right thigh with a baton by assailant Shane Stant as she was walking down the corridor in Cobo Arena, Detroit, Michigan. Where's the security? Where is the security? Kerrigan had been practicing skating on the ice rink in the arena shortly beforehand. The attack was planned by Jeff Gillooly, the ex-husband of fellow American figure skater Tanya Harding and his co-conspirator Sean Eckert. They hired Stant and his uncle Derek Smith to carry out the attack. The attack was intended to prevent Kerrigan from taking part in the ongoing 1994 United States Figure Skating Championships and the forthcoming Winter Olympics, thus increasing the prospects of Harding in both figure skating events. Now, I'm driving around that day. I'm driving with my wife. I'm listening to News Radio 88, WCBS News Radio 88. I had friends working there. And they're breaking into the news with this breathless coverage of Nancy Kerrigan being clubbed. Of course, CBS was carrying the Winter Olympics on TV in those days, and the radio station was owned by CBS in those days. The camera crew began recording shortly after the attack and recorded Kerrigan on the floor crying by the arena staff. They were surrounding her. And Kerrigan keeps saying, why? 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 Oh, it's so perfect for Al Primo. Al had figured this out by 1965. Look at this. She's crying on TV. We can sell more ads. We'll get more people watching. We can sell more ads. Think of how much money this TV station can make showing Nancy Kerrigan crying. The footage was later broadcast around the world in news programs. Kerrigan was then carried away to a changing room by her father. The attack severely bruised her knee and quadricep tendons and forced her to withdraw from the U.S. Championships. She's clubbed. She gets to Lillehammer. The women's single skating event of the 1994 Norway Winter Olympics took place 7 weeks after the attack. Kerrigan skated what she considered to be her best 2 performances of her life in the short program in free skate. This is subjective. The judges, they do what they do. Well, we think she did this double axel wrong, whatever. You can't judge for yourself. You can't. These people try to. She won the silver medal. Harding somehow was allowed to compete. Yeah, you clubbed her, but it was your friends, but she finished in 8th place. On February 1st, Jeff Galluli's attorney negotiated a plea agreement in exchange for testimony regarding all involved parties in the attack. So they had her on February 1st, and they let her continue. Galluli was sentenced to 2 years in prison after publicly apologizing to Kerrigan, adding that any apology coming from me rings hollow. True. Galluli and Eckert pleaded guilty to racketeering, while Stan Smith pleaded guilty to conspiracy to committing second-degree assault. TV is happy. And the ratings, especially February ratings month, could go through the roof. On March 16th, Harding pleaded guilty to conspiracy to hinder prosecution as a Class C felony offense. She received 3 years probation. Amazon starts. Anybody want to send your request to Amazon and your money for a package? That is a young Jeff Bezos. There he is. On July 5th, Amazon was founded by Bezos from his garage in Bellevue, Washington. I first went out to Bellevue, Washington in 1992. There was nothing there. My daughter lives in Seattle. The last time I was there, Bellevue was a modern city with skyscrapers. Initially, it was a marketplace for books. He selected the name by looking through a dictionary. He settled on Amazon because it was a place that was exotic and different, just as he envisioned for his internet enterprise. Anybody see The Lion King with their kids or grandkids? The Lion King comes out. Animated musical drama feature produced by Walt Disney Animation, containing elements of Hamlet and Macbeth by William Shakespeare. The story centers around a lion prince named Simba, who must overcome the loss of his father and the machinations of his villainous uncle, Scar, in order to take his rightful place as the king of the Pride Lions. Anybody see Forrest Gump?
Yeah.
With Tom Hanks. This is probably his breakout role. It's released on June 23rd. There's an adaptation of a 1986 novel by Winston Groom. Tom Hanks starred in the title role. The film follows the life of an intellectually disabled Alabama man named Forrest Gump, Tom Hanks, and his experiences in the 20th century United States. Forrest Gump won Best Picture, Best Actor in a Leading Role, which was Tom Hanks, Best Director, Best Visual Effects, Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Editing at the 67th Academy Awards in 1995. This is me down here. Here's me. This is the Duro Arrowwood Hotel in Rye. Alan Dorothy owned it. Bob Feller, I don't know if you remember Bob Feller, the great pitcher of the Cleveland Indians, once asked me, he said, yeah, that place up in Rybrook. He says, did you know Dorothy and Al? I said, yeah, I happen to know Dorothy and Al. I did, but that's me. These are the baseball players, and that's Don Fear, and he was the head of the Baseball Players Association at that time, and he's discussing the strike. Major League Baseball players walked off the job and went on strike on August 12th. The players were furious as Major League owners attempted to impose a salary cap to create cost certainty for the owners. On January 18th, the owners approved a new revenue-sharing plan key to a salary cap, which required the players' approval. The following day, the owners amended the Major League agreement by giving complete power to the Commissioner on Labor Negotiations, Richard Ravitch, Richard Ravitch and I didn't get along back in 1978, 1979, and I was 22 at the time when he was the head of the Metropolitan Transportation Authority. I thought it was a political hack, and he was. But he was the owner's negotiator. Don Thier represented the players. Ravitch officially unveiled the ownership proposal on June 14th. Thier rejected the offer on July 18th. On July 28th, the Players Association Executive Board set August 12th as the strike date. When the day came, the players went ahead with their threat to walk off the job. The last games played that season were on August 11th. On August 31st, 3.5 hours of negotiation with federal mediators produced no progress. No further talks were scheduled. And there I am. There's Don Thier. It's about 3 o'clock in the morning, by the way, when this was taking place. When a journalist, sometimes you got to work 36 straight hours with no sleep. And this is my friend Bruce Morton back there. We didn't get any sleep. Well, actually, we did. We got like 15, 20 minutes at a time. Something was going on. They'd nudge me, or they'd say, your shift is over. You got to get back out there because I need to go to sleep. And that's how we handled it. According to the acting commissioner, Alan H. Bud Selig, September 9th was the tentative deadline for canceling the rest of the season if no agreement was reached. The rest of the season, including the World Series, was called off by the owners on September the 14th. For the first time in 90 years, there would be no World Series. Two sides would meet sporadically that fall. The two sides went to the White House, where Bill Clinton offered to mediate, but no agreement came. I could have told Bill Clinton, why are you wasting your time? They're not going to listen to you. Guess what? He didn't listen to Bill Clinton. The curse of Red Dutton. New York Rangers win the Stanley Cup. New York Rangers beat Vancouver Canucks in 7 games to win the team's first Stanley Cup in 54 years, and in the process undid the curse of Dutton. Red Dutton, who had owned the New York and Brooklyn Americans, blamed Madison Square Garden owners. Hey, they were a good target. In fact, in 1939, they had a Bund meeting at Madison Square Garden with 15,000 Nazis there, which somehow is not in the Madison Square Garden history, the 1939 Bund meeting. Anyway, in his case, they didn't allow him to resurrect his dormant Brooklyn team in 1946 after World War II, and he allegedly swore the Rangers would never win the Stanley Cup again in his lifetime. The Americans franchise preceded the Rangers in the old Madison Square Garden on 8th Avenue and 54th Street by a year, suspended operations in 1942 because of the lack of players due to World War II, and lingering debt. The Americans never played a game in Brooklyn. They never got an arena built in Brooklyn and shared Madison Square Garden with the Rangers. Dutton died in 1987. The Rangers coincidentally never did win a cup during his lifetime. Officially, the Brooklyn Americans franchise retired from the National Hockey League in 1942. Oh, foreign trade barriers. The guy who ripped up NAFTA in his first years as president. After Donald Trump took office in January 2017, he sought to replace NAFTA with a new agreement beginning the negotiations with Canada and Mexico. In September 2018, the United States, Mexico, and Canada reached an agreement to replace NAFTA with the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, and all three countries ratified it by March 2020 when he was still in office. NAFTA remained in force until USMCA was implemented. In April 2020, Canada and Mexico notified the U.S. that they were ready to implement the agreement. The USMCA took effect on January 1st, 2020, replacing NAFTA. Trump attempted to rip up the 2018 deal when he returned to office in 2025 after winning the presidential election and imposed tariffs on Canada and Mexico. And And that story, of course, is to be written. Nelson Mandela, 1995, South African President Nelson Mandela called for a greater African agency and voice in international governments. Africa is still ignored on the world stage. Mandela did not seek a second term as South African president. He retired from active politics in 1999, but maintained a strong international presence as an advocate of peace, reconciliation, social justice, often through the work of the Nelson Mandela Foundation, established in 1999. He died on December 5th, 2013. He was 95. Well, that's Gaza and Israel in October 2023. Again, this story has not been written completely. In November 1995, Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated by Yigal Amir, an Israeli who opposed the Oslo Accords on religious grounds. Amir would change history. Absolutely would change history. Rabin's murder was followed by a string of terrorist attacks by Hamas, which undermined the support for the Labour Party in the May 1996 election. The election reflecting the growing concerns of the Israeli public over national security brought to power Benjamin Netanyahu, an outspoken critic of the Oslo Accords. Israel has been at war with the Palestinians since October 7th, 2023, and is presently at war with Iran. Jordan. After the Israeli-Jordan agreement, there was mounting opposition in Jordan to the peace treaty with Israel, and that led King Hussein to put greater restrictions on the freedom of speech. The crackdown led the opposition groups in Jordan to boycott the 1997 parliamentary elections. In 1998, Jordan refused a secret request from Benjamin Netanyahu to attack Iraq using Jordanian airspace after claiming Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. This thing with Netanyahu, Iraq had the weapons, Iran has the weapons. It's been going on now for 27 years. The treaty endures, but there was no 30th anniversary celebration of the agreement reached on October 26, 1994. Rwanda. There was a 1996 war between Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo as a result of the Rwanda genocide. Government officials, soldiers, and militia who participated in the genocide fled to the Democratic Republic of Congo, then known as Zaire, taking with them 1.4 million civilians, most of them Hutu, who had been told that the RFP would kill them all. The attacks were one of the factors leading to the war between Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo that took place in 1996. The Rwandan government began the genocide trials at the end of 1996. That trial lasted 19 years until December 31st, 2013. Clinton acquitted. Clinton was impeached. He was acquitted. Maybe, excuse my language, Ken Starr shouldn't have asked about Monica Lewinsky's blowjobs. Kenneth Starr delivered a report to Congress in September 1998, citing 11 possible impeachable offenses from his efforts by Clinton personally or through his associates to cover up indiscretions with Monica Lewinsky. Monica Lewinsky. Ken Starr and his people with him decided we can't get him on Whitewater, so let's get him on having oral sex in the Oval Office. Let me tell you a little bit about Ken Starr in a minute. Anyway, now Starr seemed fixated on Clinton's sex life with Lewinsky. They involved perjury, obstruction of justice, abuse of power. Oh, she's only an intern. She's a little girl. No, she's 23 years old. 23 years old. How many of you were married at 23? You were married at 23. So were you a little child at 23? This was radio and TV claiming that she was an innocent little girl. She was a little girl. People got married at 23. My mother was 21 when she had me. Anyway,
They involve perjury, obstruction of justice, and abuse of power. On December 19, 1998, the House of Representatives, voting largely upon party lines, impeached Clinton on 2 articles, perjury before a grand jury and obstruction of justice. I never had sex with that woman. The votes were 228 to 206 and 221 to 212. Republican House members prosecuted the impeachment articles before the Senate in early 1999. On September 12th, the Senate rejected the perjury article 4555 and the obstruction of justice article 5050. Both needed 2/3 majority or 67 votes. Clinton survived, served out the remainder of his term, which ended January 20th, 2001. Ken Starr became a TV personality. While he was on TV, nobody ever asked Ken Starr this. In 2016, Ken Starr was fired from his job as president of Baylor University, Waco, Texas, accused of ignoring sexual assault issues on campus. Oh, he kept his job as a professor. They just fired him as the president. Nobody brought it up. Hey, you were so concerned about Clinton, why weren't you concerned about the football players and the sexual assault on campus? I don't know. Boris Yeltsin, toast. My friend Shelley Saltman played tennis with him. Boris liked to drink a little bit. That's right, Shelley, we'll talk about it. Boris Yeltsin is credited with leading Russia through the dissolution of the Soviet Union and the transformation to a market economy, but his presidency also included economic instability, corruption, and the decline in Russia's global stance. After Yeltsin resigned as president of Russia on December 31st, 1999, his protege, you might have heard of his protege, Vladimir Putin, ever hear of him? Became the acting president. Putin's Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24th, 2022. The Russian invasion kicked off the most lethal war in Europe since World War II, which lasted from September 1st, 1939 through May 8th, 1945. Beckwith, I told you, there was a movie about him. The prosecutor, Bobby DeLaughter's conviction of the Ku Klux Klan member Byron D. Beckwith and the murder of Medgar Evers have triggered the reopening of dozens of civil rights cold cases. DeLaughter became an instant hero of the civil rights movement after Alec Baldwin portrayed him in the 1996 movie Ghosts of Mississippi. DeLaughter's career as a lawyer came to an end in 2009 with a federal conviction of obstruction of justice in a bribery case. He was sentenced to 18 months in a federal prison. On January 21st, 2001, D.L. Beckwith died. He was 80 years old. OJ, the Juice, Johnny Cochran. The television spectacular, or the trial, began on January 24th, 1995. The judge was Lance Eno. The Los Angeles District Attorney's Office, led by Marcia Clark and Christopher Darden. The attorneys representing Simpson, known as the Dream Team, included F. Lee Bailey, who was the first TV lawyer star, Robert Blazier, Sean Chapman Hulley, Robert Shapiro, Alan Dershowitz. Ever hear of Dershowitz? Oh, he became a hero. Another television lawyer, Alan Dershowitz. And Robert Kardashian, who unfortunately died. On October 2nd, 1995, the jury began deliberating and reached a verdict in less than 4 hours. Lance Ito, the judge, however, delayed the announcement until the following day. Wanted to get all the TV people together, probably. On October 3rd, Simpson was found not guilty. Infotainment TV was the clear winner. Simpson vowed to find the real-life killer. Never did. The Kardashian family would become reality TV stars. Dershowitz was a TV analyst. Clark also did TV. OJ Simpson ended up in jail for an armed robbery and kidnapping. And Jeff Bezos. Amazon is an online retailer with a vast array of products, from books to electronics to clothing and groceries. It also hosts third-party sellers on its platform, making it a marketplace where various businesses can sell their products directly to consumers. If you're an author, you put your book on Amazon, which I never did, you gotta give them 70%. They take 70%. Amazon offers streaming services like Amazon Prime Video and Audible, which provide access to movies, TV shows, and audio books, and he's one of the richest guys in the world. The Ice Queen, Tonya Harding's story, movie about her. The attack on Nancy Kerrigan was depicted in the 2017 film, I, Tonya. 23 years after it happened, some film producer thought the audience was still interested. Kerrigan, well, she somehow carved out a career on TV. She hosted Saturday Night Live in 1994, the year she skated. She was a contestant on ABC's Dancing with the Stars in 2017. That's, in my opinion, washed up stars go on there to get some publicity. In January 2018, she joined Inside Edition as their Super Bowl correspondent. Why? She has no background, but all of a sudden, yeah, she's Nancy Kerrigan. Mother asked questions. Kerrigan has tried her hand at television, movies, recordings, video games. From 2003 to 2004, Tonya Harding competed as a professional boxer. Her life has been the subject of many books, films, documentaries, academic studies. Academic studies, why? And she too was on Dancing with the Stars in 2018, trying to revive her career. The Lion King. The Lion King grossed more than $763 million. Today, more than $1.6 billion worldwide, making it the most successful film released in 1994. Beating Forrest Gump, True Lies, The Mask, and Speed. Today, The Lion King holds the record as the highest grossing traditionally animated film in history. 2016, the Library of Congress said, let's preserve this for cultural, historical, and aesthetic significance. Oh, here I am again. That's Don Fear. It's 1995. See, I told you I was all over this talk, right? It's like going through an autobiography of me. On March 28, 1995, the Major League players voted to return to work if a district judge supported the National Labor Relations Board's unfair labor practices complaints against the owners, which was filed on March 27. The strike ended when, this name may sound familiar, Judge Sonia Sotomayor. Ever hear of her? Yeah. The United States District Court for the Southern District of New York issued a preliminary injunction against the owners on March 31st. On April 2nd, 1995, the strike came to an end after 232 days. Season started 3 weeks later. Years later, I saw the Supreme Court Justice. She had the same hairdresser as my wife. And we had a 2-hour talk about me being in the courtroom that day. And I said, your final words from that day were, play ball. She said, you remembered. I said, I certainly did. And Brooklyn did get a hockey team, briefly. National Hockey League did have a franchise in Brooklyn. The Long Island-based New York Islanders franchise moved to Brooklyn in 2015 after the team owner, Charles Wamp, failed to get approval for a new arena in Uniondale, New York. By 2018, the Brooklyn Arena, which was not built for hockey, they're gone. The franchise was playing games again in Uniondale. Brooklyn didn't work out. In 2021, the franchise opened the arena at the site of the Belmont Racetrack in Belmont, New York. And the New York Rangers last won the Stanley Cup in 1994. Any questions? Any comments?
I want to make one comment.
Yes, go ahead.